And we're now joined by Alex Traiman, the CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief for JNS. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
Alex, the IDF confirmed that the 6 hostages found yesterday were murdered by Hamas within the last 3 days, 20 meters down in the same tunnels as Bedouin hostage Farhan al-Qadi. Given what we know so far, what's your assessment of the situation?
Well, the United States and others told Israel not to go into Rafah to begin with. They drew it as a red line. Prime Minister Netanyahu went through that red light and understood that Israel had to go into Rafah because that's where many of the senior terrorists have been hiding, and that's where many of the hostages are located. And we figured out again that that is the case, and these 6 hostages were being held there. They were only killed because the IDF was on their track, and they were going to try to attempt to rescue. Obviously, Hamas doesn't want the IDF to be able to rescue hostages, and therefore the orders are that if they know the IDF is coming, to kill the hostages first.
Alex, it's been 331 days since Hamas captured our civilians, with many now dead. Was holding the Philadelphia corridor worth the lives of these 6 hostages?
The Philadelphia corridor is one of those other places that the United States told Israel not to take. But in the last months, hundreds of tunnels were found in Rafah and under the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Gaza and Egypt. Many of those tunnels are wide enough for trucks to drive back and forth through. And it's clear that these were the smuggling routes used to arm Hamas in Gaza, and potentially have been used to smuggle terrorist leaders and or hostages even out of the Gaza Strip. So it's an important, very important strategic corridor for the IDF to control, specifically if Israel wants to make sure that Hamas doesn't restock itself with arms and other supplies after a ceasefire is reached.
Alex, President Biden expressed deep sorrow over the death of American hostage Hersch Goldberg-Polin. The president constantly spoke out on the issue, perhaps more than our own prime minister. How might this impact Israeli-U.S. relations?
Well, I think that the Biden administration could have done a lot more, and they could have put the overwhelming majority of the pressure, diplomatic pressure, on Hamas, on Iran, to release the hostages, but they clearly did not do that. We see over the last period that much of the diplomatic pressure has been put on Israel to reach the ceasefire, not on Hamas to release all of the hostages. I don't think that it's going to affect in any way the Israel-U.S. relations, but if you will recall, it was told that the last round of negotiations was a last chance, which I don't understand why it's the last chance. As long as there are still hostages and as long as fighting still rages, there should be more and more and endless chances to get the hostages back. We have to see whether the United States is going to be willing to act as a broker to try to negotiate a release after this horrific news.
Well, what message was Hamas sending with these murders, and what message should the world understand from their actions?
Well, this was the purpose of taking the hostages to begin with, to commit psychological terror against the state of Israel, to keep Israelis hoping and guessing and waiting for the eventual rescue or return of the hostages. Unfortunately, the murder of these 6 hostages is another reminder of the cruel reality that these hostages were taken in the most brutal massacre in the history of the state of Israel on October 7th. I guess the only consolation here is that it does provide some bit of closure for those families, and particularly for Americans and English speakers with regards to Hersch Goldberg-Polin, and everybody saw how his mother Rachel Goldberg and John Polin, were really doing everything that they could to try to secure his release, including appearing at the Democratic National Convention just over a week ago. So horrific moment, of course, for everybody.
Today marks the first day of school, and as a father, you know this day feels very different from in years past. Can you describe the atmosphere in Israel today and how we're coping with this tragic news?
Yeah, well, certainly there are close to 80,000 residents in the north that have been expelled from their homes shortly after October 7th because of the frequent pummeling by Hezbollah on their communities. There was a hope that they were going to be returned home in order to begin to send their kids to school on September 1st. Obviously, that hasn't happened as of yet. It's a difficult reality for people to be sending their children to school. Kids have been following the war. These are the types of situations that children should not know anything about. But unfortunately, here in the Middle East and here in the land of Israel, we recognize that we have to fight for our existence and fight for our survival. And yet another school year begins with Israel at war and dreaming of peace.
Well, thank you very much for that, Alex.
Thank you for having me.